So let's watch short video clips about the three schools of talking second language acquisitions. So try to watch and listen to the video clips and then try to catch up with some of the main points or the main topics that we may be discussing later. Please, okay, come on, let's go. The clips is about 12 minutes long.
This video discusses the three different schools of thought, primarily in the fields of linguistics and psychology: structural linguistics and behavioral psychology. In the 1910s and 1950s, the structural or descriptive school of linguistics, with its advocates Leonard Bloomfield, Edward Sapir, Charles Hockett, Charles Fries, and others, prided itself in a rigorous application of scientific observations of human languages. It contends that only publicly observable responses could be subject to investigation. The task of the linguist is to describe human languages and to identify the structural characteristics of those languages. This means that language could be dismantled into small units and that these units could be described scientifically, contrasted, and added up again to form the whole. Research findings show that the prevailing paradigm in linguistic research in the 1940s and 1950s viewed language as a linear, structured system that described grammatical sequences in terms of separate components that could comprise a sentence. These analyses were what Noam Chomsky later called surface structure relationships. According to Chomsky, syntactic structures are not learned but acquired by the child. Linguistic studies had been made to prove that children have innate knowledge of grammar that they could not have learned. Teaching implications. No one may have better manifested structural linguistics in the classroom than Charles Fries, whose structural drills and pattern practices were described in his 1945 book, Teaching and Learning English as a Foreign Language, and in his 1952 book, The Structure of English. The very popular audiolingual method drew many insights from Fries's seminal work.
So here is an example of a repetition drill. I will model the language and then my class will repeat after me. So, this is a cup.
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 The observation of states of consciousness, thinking, concept formation, or the acquisition of knowledge proves unreliable, and thus such topics are impossible to examine in a behavioral framework. Among psychologists, a behavioral paradigm also focused on publicly observable responses. Typical behavioral models were classical and operant conditioning. The classical experiments with Pavlov's dog and Skinner's boxes typify the position that organisms can be conditioned to respond in desired ways, given the correct degree and scheduling of reinforcement. Generative linguistics and cognitive psychology. In the decade of the 1960s, Chomsky's generative transformational linguistics emerged. Chomsky was trying to show that human language cannot be scrutinized simply in terms of observable stimuli and responses. The generative linguist was interested not only in describing language, but also in arriving at an explanatory level of adequacy. In 1916, Ferdinand de Saussure claimed that there was a difference between parole, that is what Skinner observes, and what Chomsky called language performance, on the one hand, and langue, that is language competence or our underlying and unobservable language ability. Later, however, descriptive linguists chose largely to ignore langue or language competence and to study parole or language performance. Similarly, cognitive psychologists asserted that meaning, understanding, and knowing were significant data for psychological study. Rather than focusing mechanistically on stimulus-response connections, cognitivists tried to discover psychological principles of organization and functioning. Cognitive psychologists, like generative linguists, sought to discover underlying motivations and deeper structures of human behavior by using a rational approach. Both the structural linguist and the behavioral psychologist were interested in description, in answering what questions about human behavior, objective measurement of behavior in controlled circumstances. The generative linguist and cognitive psychologist were also interested in the what question, but they were far more interested in the why, like what underlying factors, innate, psychological, social, or environmental circumstances, caused a particular behavior in a human being. If you were to observe someone walk into your house, pick up a chair, and fling it through your window, and then walk out, different kinds of questions could be asked. One set of questions would relate to what happened, the physical description of the person, the time of day, the size of the chair, the impact of the chair, and so forth. Another set of questions would ask why the person did what he or she did, what were the person's motives and psychological state, what might have been the cause of the behavior, and so on. The first set of questions is very rigorous and exacting. It allows no flaw, no mistake in measurement, but does it give you ultimate answers? The second set of questions is richer, but obviously riskier. By daring to ask some difficult questions about the unobserved, we may lose some ground, but gain more profound insight about human behavior. Constructivism, a multidisciplinary approach. Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky are names often associated with constructivism. A refreshing characteristic of constructivism is its integration of linguistic, psychological, and sociological paradigms. Constructivism has two branches: cognitive constructivism and social constructivism. In the cognitive version of constructivism, emphasis is placed on the importance of learners constructing their own representation of reality. Social constructivism emphasizes the importance of social interaction and cooperative learning in constructing both cognitive and emotional images of reality. According to research findings, constructivism is a school of thought that emphasizes both the learner's role in constructing meaning out of available linguistic input and the importance of social interaction in creating a new linguistic system. Early constructivists like Vygotsky and Piaget actively emphasized their views many decades ago. Teaching implications. As early as the 1970s, some methods advocated the central role of the learner's construction of language, the silent way, and community language learning, and the importance of meaningful interaction. The early forms of the notional functional syllabus, which started in the United Kingdom. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development portrays the distance between learners' existing developmental state and their potential development. ZPD describes tasks that a learner has not yet learned, but is capable of learning with appropriate stimuli. It is an important facet of social constructivism because it describes tasks that a child cannot yet do alone, but could do with the assistance of more competent peers or adults. All three of the historical positions described in this video, structural behavioral, generative cognitive, and constructivist, must be seen as important in creating balanced descriptions of second language acquisition. Consider for a moment the analogy of a very high mountain viewed from a distance. From one direction, the mountain may have a sharp peak, easily identified glaciers, and distinctive rock formations. From another direction, however, the same mountain might now appear to have two peaks and different configurations of its slopes, the second peak being formerly hidden from view. From still another direction, yet further characteristics emerge, heretofore unobserved. The study of second language acquisition is very much like the viewing of our mountain. We need multiple tools and vantage points in order to ascertain the whole picture.
Okay, now class, what do you feel about the video clips and what could you get from the clip? Như Vinh, please, and can you share with us some of what you have watched or thought? Hello, Như Vinh. Vinh or Vinh?
Her name is Như.
Vĩnh Như, please, Vĩnh Như. Vĩnh Như, are you still here? Hello, Vĩnh Như. Okay, so it's okay, so Như. Kim, please. Tống Thiên Kim.
Yes, hello teacher and hello everyone.
Okay, good morning.
Come on.
So after the clips, I remember like three schools of thought that have just mentioned. So I find it rather interesting and insightful. Yes, and as what I remember, they mentioned the structural, linguistic, and behavioral psychology. And the second one is the linguistic and cognitive psychology. And the last one is like constructivism.
Okay, so excellent. So remembrance. So can you share with us any of your ideas? So I think what you have walked is very interesting. What you have talked is very interesting too. So can you share with us some kind of your personal belief towards the schools of these three schools? Your general belief, general things, generally only.
I think my belief is about the first one, the first criteria that I have mentioned, the structural linguistic and behavioral psychology.
Now, who is the father of this school of thought? You know, the father, one of the father, the great father, the one of the biggest scholar who formed the school, who formed the methodology.
The general school of thoughts.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have no idea about this one.
Okay, so we are talking about them later. Thank you. Thảo Quỳnh, please, your ideas, please. Thảo Quỳnh, have you got any ideas about the clips that we have just watched? Hello, Thảo Quỳnh. So we are not sure whether Thảo Quỳnh is here. Okay. Nhi, please.
Yes, teacher.
Okay.
I can see that there are three school thoughts in second language acquisition. About my belief, I think that the three school thoughts have certain impact in the development of our principle of language and teaching. About the first one, structural linguistics is had the father of Leonard Bloomfield, and I remember that the scientist just observed. A research subject is focused on the publicly observable responses. I mean, they just focus on describe human language and identify some of the structural characteristics of the languages. Let me remember what is more. I think the main points of the structural linguistics is that on the scientists they ignore the mentalists. I mean, they just focus on what they can observe. They don't need to know what happened in learner mind, what process that occur, how they learn, and how something like that.
Okay, so excellent sharing and knowledge. Okay, so thank you.
Yeah.
So that's enough for the video clips, and we are going to present some of the key points, all the things that you think most important to talk about, because of the two reasons. Firstly, mostly this is all theoretical, and secondly, most of the teaching material are in the coursebook that you can have a later reference. But so we are here in the classroom just briefing some of the main points or the key points that we have to keep in our mind, and so that you can fully develop later in your career, your jobs. Okay. So as a side, we are going to take the presentation in groups. Okay. So let's manage your group work, please. So Thương, please let's go with the group work management.
Okay, we will follow the lesson. So as you can see, the first part would be about the school of thoughts in linguistics and psychology, and this should be presented by Hương Nhi, Như, and Yang.
Okay, so thank you. So how are you going, Nhi?
Yes, teacher.
So how are you going? Because
Really well.
oh. So how are you going with the presentation? I mean, your presentation. How do you want?
Our presentation was mostly based on the textbook, but teacher, I'm afraid that all of our information for the presentation is quite the same as the video clip you have shown. And now we present it again.
Okay, just summarize the key points only. Have you got the slide?
Yeah, we have the slides.
Okay, so just show the slides up so that you can go through them. But just skip the things that we have just watched and things that you might think your friends can easily overcome them. So just go over a little bit for the ones that we need more elaborations. Okay, come on. So present your slideshows and then just go with your presentation.
Yes.
Hello everyone, can you see the screen now?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, teacher. Miss Nye will be sharing the screen for me, and I will be presenting schools of thoughts in linguistics and psychology. It was pretty much as what we have all watched in the video, but I will try to pinpoint the things that I think to be difficult to understand for everyone. So hello everyone again, and our presentation will have 3 main points, which are structural linguistics and behavioral psychology, generative linguistics and cognitive psychology, and the final thing is constructivism, or a multidisciplinary approach. So let's come to the first part, which is structural linguistics and behavioral psychology. Structural linguistics are sometimes, or most of the time, called descriptive linguistics, because the goal of these schools is trying to describe. We'll come to that later. And the advocates, the big names of the field is, as you see on the screen, Leonard Bloomfield, Edward Sapir, Charles Hockett, and Charles Fries. Right, next slide, please. Thank you. Can you move to the next? Okay. The research subject of this school is only publicly observable responses. So you might wonder what is publicly observable responses. Those are the kind of materials that can be objectively perceived, recorded, and measured. So that's publicly observable responses. And a linguist's task is, as I've said before, descriptive, describing the human language, and also identifying the structural characteristics of languages, which means they try to break down a language, like try to analyze it into smaller components. Right. Next slide, please. Right. Here you can see the axiom of structural linguistics. The terminology axiom is a belief or something that many people share, like is commonly believed. So the axiom of structural linguistics is that languages can differ from each other without limits. So basically what this means is that there could be 2 languages completely different from each other from lexicology, grammar points, the order of word parts in a sentence, like nothing is the same. The second is no preconceptions could apply across languages, which means that you cannot use your knowledge or what you observe the rules of one language and then try to apply it to another language. That would not be possible according to this school of thoughts. And finally, language could be separated into small species or units and could be described scientifically, contrasted, and added up again to form the whole, which means you can have the smallest components of a language and then you try to build it from the bottom up and then you would have the language again. That's what this school believes. Next slide, please. So, in conclusion, structural linguists believe that it is a non-mentalistic view of language, and also it it considers language as a linear structure system. Linear, it means like following a straight line. It comes from the small step to the bigger step and then to the bigger step, like it's a straight line. A structure system, as I've said before, we can break it down to smaller components. And language contains grammatical sequences in terms of separate components, and that could comprise a sentence. Later on, Noam Chomsky called it the surface structure relationships. We call it structure because, well, language structure is what we can see, what we can observe, like overtly. We have the physical observation. So I think that's why Chomsky called it the surface structure relationships. Right, next one, please. Next, we have behaviorism. I think everyone is more familiar with this school of thoughts. It's more about psychology, but everyone is more familiar with this one because I think during our TESOL class, everyone had a chance to find out about this. Right, the research subject is also publicly observable responses, and the research approach is the scientific method. Some models of this behaviorism you can see on the slide here: classical and operant conditioning, rote verbal learning, instrumental, discrimination, and other empirical approaches. You can find out everything in this slide online. So let's keep this one. Right. This is the Pavlov's dog experiments, and I think I would like to explain it a little bit. First, as the first frame of the picture, you can see that the dog is salivating. Để nước miếng mọi người. Dog is salivating when it sees food, and that is unconditioned stimulus, which that is, we do not intervene, we do not interfere with the fact that the dog is salivating because it's natural of a dog to salivate when it sees food. And then Pavlov used a neutral stimulus. He rang a bell, and the dog did not respond because why would it? It doesn't see anything that stimulates its brain. When he combined the two stimulus, he showed it the food while ringing the bell, and then the dog see the food, it starts salivating, but at the same time it can hear the bell ringing. So there's some sort of connection forming in its brain between seeing the food and hearing the bell. So after a while, they can remove the food and then they just ring the bell. And that preformed connection between the bell and the food makes the dog salivate. So every time he just ring the bell without the food, it will still salivate. So the condition, this experiments is why he came up with the conclusion that learners somehow can be conditioned to do things, that is, can be trained basically to respond to languages in the desired ways. But we'll come to that conclusion later. Next experiment, please. Right, this is a Skinner box, which is pretty much similar to Pavlov's, just a different kind of experiments. So you would put a mouse in sort of a box with two buttons, as you can see on the screen here. If he push the red button, they will play a really loud sound, and then it will also shock the mouse with the shock generator underneath, and it would cause distress and trauma to the mouse. And when the mouse presses the button on the left, food will be presented to him, like there's a food dispenser there, and over time the mouse will learn to only push the button that will give it food rather than the button that will trigger the alarm and the shock generator. So again, this also proves that things like animals can be conditioned to respond to the desired ways. Next slide, please. Right, this is the conclusion of behavioral risk, that organisms like animals, humans, the same, can be conditioned to respond in desired ways given the correct degree and schedule of reinforcement. Like, why do we need reinforcement? Because in order for a connection in our brain to persist, it would need reinforcement. So like it makes the connection between the different stimulus stronger and longer lasting. Like if Pavlov and Skinner only let the mouse like do it a couple of times, it would probably forget which button is for food and which button is for torture, so it wouldn't work. So it needs reinforcement, like repetition over time. Just repeat. Right. Next slide, please. Now we come to the second school of thoughts, which is generative linguistics and cognitive psychology. Right. These schools emerged in 1960 to 1980s, and the biggest name in the school, of course, is Noam Chomsky. I think we've heard his name for enough times. So he's a big name, and also a number of his followers. Right. So the task of a linguist in generative transformational linguistics is, that's partly similar to the task of the previous school that we've discussed, that is to achieve the level of descriptive adequacy, like of the descriptive linguistics. But they also try to arrive at an explanatory level of adequacy. Explanatory, explain. So they try to explain language in a certain level of adequacy. This is what Chomsky called the principal basis, independent of any particular language, for the selection of the descriptive adequate grammar of each language. What he means by, back again please. What he means by independence of any particular language is that there exists a ground, a rule, or a principle that can be applied across many languages. Like, for example, there is a structure that is subject, verb, and object in English. We can say the cat ate the dog, and then in Vietnamese we also have that structure, con mèo nó ăn con chuột. So there are some rules that can be applied universally across languages. Right. Thank you. Next slide, please. And in generative linguistics, there are two concepts that are parole and lang. Again, parole is what Skinner observes, and Chomsky call it performance or language performance, and a lang is the competence of the learners or the underlying unobservable language ability. Unobservable, which means we cannot see it, we cannot hear it because it's happening inside the English learner's or user's brain, so it cannot be recorded physically. Right, next slide, please. Right. The research subject of cognitive psychology is the same. It is the underlying motivations and deeper structures of human behavior. And rather than scientific, the approach of this research is rational, like reasoning. And the research tools are tools of logic, reasons, extrapolation, inference, change from descriptive to explanatory. So you can see the word extrapolation here. It basically means that you have to estimate, like estimate an unknown value based on the already known sequence of values of facts. You can understand this as this. You have information, you have the general rules, and then you can predict what will happen in the future from the values that you already have. So it's extrapolation, and also inference from descriptive to explanatory. So rather than describing, showing, they try to explain, they try to answer the question. Well, we can see that he does that. We can see that the research subject does this, does that, but why? So they try to answer the question why, and that is the explanatory power. The next slide, please.
Okay, so because this call is going to end, so we have to stop this call and try to move on to another call, please. Okay, let me send you the new call. Come on.
Thank you.
So we have to go out of this call. Okay, so welcome back again. So it's very interesting listening to your presentation. Lots of knowledge and practical advice or ideas.
Our group was kind of afraid that it would be boring because concepts.
So no, okay. So we know that. So theoretical classes are usually not very interesting. Not very interesting. But we are here just teachers, and we are just sharing the things, all things that we want to share, both theories and practices too. Okay. So this is very interesting and very knowledgeable. Listening to your presentation, which would be very helpful. Would be great. It would be of great helpness. Helpfulness. So come on. So you can continue. Okay, you can continue.
Yeah. So we can come to the comparison and contrast of the two schools, which are structural versus behavioral, and generative and cognitive. So both schools are interested in description. They both try to describe language or its surface level. Structure is surface because that's what we can see, we can measure, we can record it, so it's surface describing. And they answer the what questions about human behavior, like what we do, and objective measurement of behavior in controlled circumstances basically means that we can make use of publicly observable responses, as I've explained before. Let's move on to the difference. Generative linguistics and cognitive psychology were more interested in the why question. Like they answer the what question, but it's not their primary focus. They try to answer why. The underlying factors, whether it is innate, it means like it was born naturally with you, and there's nothing that affects it. And psychological, social, environmental circumstances that could cause a particular behavior in a human. For example, somebody comes to class and starts yelling for no reason. The descriptive linguist will try to ask how loud was he, what word did he use, while the generative linguist will try to find out what multidisciplinary approach, we see, please, we see the word multidisciplinary, which means we can combine different schools, different approaches, different knowledge from different people. It's a combination. And the two big names of constructivism are Jean Piaget, I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, but John Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. This school emerged around 1980s and 2000s. Right. Next, please. Constructivism is an integration of linguistics, psychological, and sociological paradigm. We've been saying the word paradigm a lot. A paradigm is, you can understand it as a typical example that most people use because it is correct, generally applicable to what they are trying to prove. So, typical example paradigm. They say that learning is a process in which the learner actively constructs or builds new ideas or concepts. Actively. So the role of the learner is really, really important because he has to actively construct his own learning. And it emphasizes both on the learner's role in constructing meaning out of available linguistic inputs, which means that different people, given the same linguistic inputs like a text, a newspaper, magazine, something, they will construct different meaning out of it because different abilities, different social background, different things. It is their active learning. And they also stress on the importance of social interaction in creating new linguistic system because language comes from social interaction. It serves the purpose of social interaction, and it works the other way around. Social interaction can also change, modify, affect the linguistic system. Next slide, please. There are two branches of constructivism, cognitive and social. The emphasis of cognitive constructivism is that learners construct their own representation of reality. Right? They make their own reality. While social constructivism emphasizes on social interaction, as I've mentioned before, and cooperative learning, cooperate, which means there need to be more than one people to learn, and they construct both cognitive and emotional images of reality. They do not simply realize or acknowledge something, they also attach a sort of emotional connection to it. For example, when we say, when we read a sentence with a really tragic meaning behind it, the child was left by his mother when he was really young, we do not just acknowledge the fact that the boy was abandoned, we also form sort of an apologetic and empathetic feeling towards the content in that sentence. That is the emotional images of reality. We feel and we connect emotionally to reality. Next slide, please. This is the conclusion of two big things in school. For Piaget, learning is a developmental process that involves change, self-generation, construction, each building a prior knowledge learning experience. Prior means before, so the learners have to actively build their language competence based on what they have learned before. For Vygotsky, he concluded that children's thinking and meaning making is socially constructed. It happens in a society, in an environment that involves more than one people, more than one person, and it emerges out of their social interactions with their environments. I think this is pretty straightforward. So next slide, please. For the second school of constructivism, which is social constructivism, there is a concept that is zone of proximal development, ZPD. I think we are all familiar with this term. So, according to Vygotsky, the distance between learners' existing developing state and their potential development, the zone, like the space in between, is called the zone of proximal development, and it describes class that the learner has not yet learned, but is capable of learning with appropriate stimuli. Next slide, please. You can see a sort of a demonstration of speeding here. So, in the middle is what learners can do unaided. That is something they already know. They don't need instruction. They don't need help. They can do it on themselves. And the outermost layer is what learners cannot do. No matter how hard we try to help them, no matter how forcefully we make them, they simply cannot do it. They do not have the ability to complete such things. In the middle is the zone of proximal development, which is what they cannot do yet, but they are able to when they get our help or guidance. So as a teacher, we should focus on the CBT, like try to put our students in the CBT. Yeah, we can use different stimuli, reminding, prompting, modeling. Basically, we scaffold the learner's environment that they can develop new knowledge based on what they already learned. And scaffold, scaffold is sort of cái xà mà người ta dùng để xây nhà.
Scaffold là trong xây dựng các em sẽ gọi là cái dàn giáo. Còn trong giáo học Pháp thì Giang sẽ nói rõ thêm cái nghĩa, cái term Vietnamese term của scaffolding.
Temporarily helps enable students to carry out the task that he or she cannot do alone, and it is designed to bring learner to a stage where he or she can do similar tasks independently. Suppose we help, we give them guidance, instructions like prompting, etc. We try to give them the tool or the path, paved way for them to use their already attained language ability to acquire new ability. For example, they can, when teaching writing, assume that your students are already capable of writing sentences. You can try to elevate the learning by asking them to write a paragraph. But do not let them do it alone. You will give them like the basic structure of a paragraph. There is a thesis sentence, and then there are, or you can say the title or something. Then we will have supporting sentences, like you can describe these smaller ideas and then conclusion sentence. You can give them the framework. Then we'll use their ability to write sentences and combine different sentences into a paragraph. So that is the scaffolding. You give them guidance, instructions. Next slide, please. And there is a contrast with Piaget's theory of learning. Vygotsky thinks that a unity of learning and development, social interaction, was foundational in cognitive development. Well, Piaget says that stages of development setting a precondition or readiness for learning, and he stressed the importance of individual cognitive development. So, in the word precondition, before we see the word prior, is before, and precondition is also before. So, learner has to be ready for learning, and he has to actively it's also in the book. So I think, well, we can look at this later. And this is also the end of the session. Thanks everyone for listening, and we welcome the questions.
Okay, so thank you so much for the preparation and presentation too. So you should must well prepared for your talk, which is very useful, arousing, and knowledgeable. That we can learn a lot from your presentation too. Very clear explanations, strong, convincing examples or illustrations as well. Okay, so very good ones. The first thing is your question, please. Your question, please. Come on, everybody. You can stop your friends for questions. You can ask further detailing on each of the point that you might not really understand well. Everybody, or you can ask me for some further explanation or discussion too. Come on. So after all presentation, we will collect them all and send them all in the whole package coming back to you, so that you can get it your reference for your career reference and for our course reference too. And so by that I mean all of our course requirements, our course examinations, or midterm or kind of final term examination, or exercise compositions are all in on these kinds of material. So both from the course book, both from my presentation, and from your presentations, your presentation too. Okay, come on. So your question, please. So we've heard your friends presenting all the 3 basic and tradition school of talks relating to the second language acquisitions. Okay, come on, everybody, please. Any questions, please? So the other groups, any questions? Về mặt lý thuyết thì cơ bản thì tôi đoán chắc là tất cả các em đều nắm rất là chắc, rất là giỏi, có thể là những cái chuyên gia. Một là cái việc học của chúng ta ở đây thì nó cũng mang tính tương đối thôi, và nó cũng mang tính là tạm thời, nhưng mà cái sâu lâu dài hơn á, thì tôi nghĩ là hướng đến các em 2 việc. Một là cái việc thi cử trong lớp mình thì tôi nghĩ cũng hoàn toàn rất là đơn giản với các em thôi. Với những cái người học như các em thì cái việc thi cử chắc chắn là không vấn đề gì với các em đâu. Tôi cam đoan chắc chắn là như thế. Nếu thi cử hay kiểm tra gì đó thì tất cả nó chỉ nằm trong những cái mà chúng ta đã có ở đây thôi, đặc biệt là những cái các em đã làm rất là tốt. Thì một là khi chúng ta làm nghề thì các bạn sẽ chọn lọc, hoặc là mình đứng ở những cái stand, những cái position nào đó để mình chọn những cái belief để mình có thể áp dụng cho cái công việc của mình. Vì chắc chắn là chúng ta học cái TESOL, học cái MA về TESOL xong thì chắc chắn các bạn sẽ có cái MA T6 in TESOL, nhưng mà cái TESOL này là nó rất là tổng quát đó. Còn cái công việc của mỗi người, cái lĩnh vực làm việc của mỗi người nó sẽ mỗi khác. Do vậy các bạn phải chọn mỗi một cái belief của mình, một cái hướng của mình, nó có thể là nó khác biệt, nó không giống với mọi người. Thứ hai là chắc chắn một điều rằng là qua 2 cái buổi tiếp xúc á, thì tôi thấy các bạn có nhiều bạn sẽ đi về cái hướng mà nghiên cứu tốt, và có thể đi theo cái hướng sâu về nghiên cứu. Chẳng hạn tôi thấy như là sáng nay đầu tiên là tôi nói chuyện với ai ta? Bạn đầu tiên là bạn gì tôi quên rồi, ở Gia Lai á.
Dạ em tên Hường này.
Hường là một giáo viên rất là giỏi. Chắc chắn bạn là một giáo viên rất là giỏi. Còn chẳng hạn như Giang có thể đi theo cái hướng nghiên cứu. Thậm chí là bạn có thể chọn một cái thesis, một cái dissertation sớm để mình có cái quá trình chuẩn bị, mình nghiên cứu sâu về lý thuyết, mình nắm bắt cái thực tế, theo dõi cái thực tế để bạn tích lũy cái kinh nghiệm trên thực tế, để học tiến sĩ. Chắc chắn là bởi vì thời gian dài tôi chưa có tiếp xúc nhiều, nhưng mà rõ ràng là càng tiếp xúc với các bạn thì càng thấy là cái học thạc sĩ này đối với các bạn chỉ là cái giai đoạn khởi đầu thôi. Đối với các bạn không khó khăn gì, mà nó phải định hướng xa hơn về cái career development đó. Thì chẳng hạn như Giang, tôi thấy là bạn có một cái tố chất là chắc chắn là em sẽ đi cái nghiên cứu sinh được. Nghiên cứu sinh thì nên đi nghiên cứu sinh về TESOL, chứ đừng đi nghiên cứu sinh về applied về linguistics. Linguistics thì chúng ta rất là khó. Tôi cũng giống như các bạn rồi, tôi học MA TESOL, học Bachelor in TESOL rồi, MA cũng TESOL, nhưng mà đi cái PhD thì tôi đi buộc phải chuyển sang linguistics, thì nó có một cái khó khăn và có cái gap rất là lớn. Và cái hiệu quả và cái kiến thức mà mình tổng hợp mình áp dụng á, nó cũng không có mang tính hệ thống, nó cũng có cái sự rời rạc đó. Nhưng mà rõ ràng chúng ta ở đây vẫn mạnh về TESOL hơn. Đi in linguistics thì theo hướng là applied to linguistics, nhưng mà nếu mà các bạn đi PhD á, thì nên đi thẳng về TESOL luôn. Thì bây giờ cũng có rất nhiều trường đã đào tạo cái tiến sĩ về giảng dạy tiếng Anh. Ở thành phố Hồ Chí Minh thì có Open University, ở miền Trung thì có Huế, Đà Nẵng. Còn Hà Nội thì đương nhiên là họ là đầu ngành rồi, là về Đại học Sư phạm Ngoại ngữ Hà Nội, Đại học Quốc gia Hà Nội, là những cái trường có thể dạy về MA with TESOL. Trong cái presentation của Group 1 đó, thì nó có hai cái này là tôi muốn các bạn xem lại cái clips, cái video clips ban đầu ở hai cái nội dung cụ thể mà tôi sắp sửa muốn trao đổi thêm với các bạn, bởi vì nó cũng rất là hay đó. Thì các bạn xem lại hai cái phần trích của cái clips này, xem lại, và sau đó thì chúng ta sẽ có những cái discussion xa hơn. Tôi nghĩ ở đây chúng ta có thể nói chuyện với nhau bằng tiếng Việt, bởi vì sau những cái phần lý thuyết á, các bạn cần phải hiểu rất là chắc, rất là sâu về những cái mà chúng ta chưa thể được nếu mà chúng ta sử dụng tiếng Anh đó hết, thì chúng ta nó có thể bỏ đi những cái hay của cái phần mà chúng ta có thể thấu hiểu được đó. Còn toàn bộ những cái phần còn lại thì các bạn có thể tự tham khảo, tự học, và trong giáo trình thì chúng ta trên mạng internet cũng rất là nhiều đó. Mời các bạn xem lại cái clips.
The three different schools of thought, primarily in the fields of linguistics and psychology, and that typically comprise a sentence. Linguistic studies have been made to prove that children but acquired by the called surface structure related.
Thứ nhất, mời các bạn xem cái tree này. Cái này nó khoảng chừng 15 giây thôi. Và sau đó chúng ta có một cái thảo luận nhỏ.
Relationships. According to Chomsky, syntactic structures are not learned but acquired by the child. Linguistic studies have been made to prove that children have innate knowledge of grammar that they could not have learned. Teaching implications.
Cái tree vừa rồi nó có gợi cho các bạn một cái ideas nào không? Theo như cái clips này thì nói về cái tree này, nói về cái belief, cái principles của ông Chomsky như thế nào, và quan điểm của bạn về cái belief này của ông như thế nào. Chúng ta có cần nghe lại không? Có cần nghe lại cái này không?
According to Chomsky, syntactic structures are not learned but acquired by the child. Linguistic studies have been made to prove that children have innate knowledge of grammar that they could not have learned.
Okay, so your ideas, please. Ý kiến của các bạn. Và nó có cái gì liên quan đến cái chúng ta đã thảo luận rồi không? ở cái tiết đại học đầu tiên không?
Yes, sir. So I think that he meant that the children have some some innate ability to acquire the language, in specific the grammar structure, and these grammar structure are too complex for them to learn them, because they're children. So the reason why they can use the language is because they acquire these grammar naturally, not through learning, because these are too complicated for children for them to learn. So they acquire.
Okay, so excellent idea from Ngân. So thank you. So Noam Chomsky generated the term syntactic structure, and by syntactic structure, he mentioned a very strong belief that children could acquire the syntax naturally or innately. So by that we meant through the language acquisition process, not through learning, because some of the syntactic structures was very complex to learn like a normal lessons or instruction. Okay, so excellent ideas from Ngân Nguyễn. Cái ví dụ này ông Chomsky ông đưa ra là nó diễn tả một cái belief lớn hơn của ông về cái quá trình lĩnh hội ngôn ngữ của người học, kể cả những cái syntactic structure, các cái cấu trúc ngữ pháp, syntax, cú pháp học, thì trẻ con nó intake một cách là innately, tức là một cách bản năng thông qua cái quá trình lĩnh hội ngôn ngữ nhiều hơn, và thậm chí là duy nhất, chứ không có liên quan đến quá trình học ngôn ngữ. Tất nhiên đây là cái quan điểm của ông Chomsky thôi. Các cái schools phía sau và các cái teaching methods và approaches phía sau thì các bạn sẽ thấy rằng là đây là cái quan điểm độc lập của một nhà nghiên cứu trong một cái thời điểm nào đó thôi. Nó không phải đúng cho tất cả mọi trường hợp và không phải đúng cho tất cả các cái times khác nhau, các cái generations khác nhau. Rồi, thì các bạn phải lưu ý cái chuyện này, nó chỉ là một khía cạnh thôi. Cái thứ hai, các bạn xem cái đoạn thứ hai. Cái đoạn này trong cái presentations của nhóm Giang cũng đã trình bày rất là tốt. Đó, thì bây giờ chúng ta quay lại, chúng ta refresh nó lại xem là nó nói về cái gì mà nó như thế nào.
Grammar, the structure of English. Thinking, focused assessment. Stimuli, which performance on the one hand, and long that observes who are claimed.
Okay.
In 1916,
so let's begin now.
Ferdinand de Saussure claimed that there was a difference between parole, that is what Skinner observes, and what Chomsky called language performance on the one hand, and long, that is language competence, or our underlying and unobservable language ability. Later, however, descriptive linguists chose largely to ignore long, or language competence, and to study parole, or language performance. Similarly, cognitive psychologists asserted that meaning, understanding, and knowing were significant data for psychological study. Rather than focusing mechanistically on stimulus-response connections, cognitivists tried to discuss chose largely Ferdinand de Saussure, but also in arriving at an explanatory level of adequacy. In 1916, Ferdinand de Saussure claimed that there was a difference between parole, that is what Skinner observes, and what Chomsky called language performance on the one hand, and long, that is language competence, or our underlying and unobservable language ability. Later, however, descriptive linguists chose largely to ignore long, or language competence, and to study parole, or language performance. Similarly,
okay, so we stop here for some discussions. So, can you guess what I'm going to talk about and what should we be discussing about? So, any ideas, please? Come on, any ideas, please? What here was also mentioned in your friend's presentation. So they mentioned something similarly to this one, to the one that we are talking about now. So what that is? Come on, please. The other classmates, please. The other members of your ideas, please. Come on. Chứ các bạn hiểu cái đoạn này như thế nào? Cái mà Giang đã trình bày trong cái phần của nhóm bạn rồi. Tại đây ông Ferdinand de Saussure là một nhà ngôn ngữ học người Thụy Sĩ. Ông này cũng là cha đẻ của ngành linguistics. Ngôn ngữ học là một trong những cái nhà khoa học lớn nhất trên thế giới trong cái ngành khoa học xã hội nhân văn. Ông này là cha đẻ của nhiều cái thuyết về ngôn ngữ học. Thì trong cái clips thì các bạn thấy là ông đề cập hai cái term, ông coin, ông phát minh ra hai cái term là parole và long. Đó là vì ông là người Thụy Sĩ, ông sử dụng tiếng Pháp, cho nên là mình hay gọi tên ông là Ferdinand de Saussure đó. Nếu mà các bạn đi về linguistics á, thì các bạn sẽ biết cái ông này nhiều hơn. Còn nếu mà mình đi về Tissot thì mình biết ông hơn, bởi vì ông là người Thụy Sĩ và cái language ông dùng là French đó. Thì có hai cái thuật ngữ. Còn trong tiếng Anh các bạn thấy là trong cái presentation của nhóm của các bạn đó cũng đề cập đến cái hai cái nó cũng tương tự như thế này. Đó là cái Chomsky ông gọi là performance và cái competence. Thì nó tương đương với hai cái term mà ông Ferdinand de Saussure ông đề cập. Đó là cái parole và cái long. Rồi các bạn có thể thảo luận sâu hơn chút xíu về hai cái term là performance với cái competence này là như thế nào. Các bạn cho ý kiến cá nhân của mình xem. We can discuss in Vietnamese if you like. Bây giờ bạn nào chưa nói ta? Hương Khôi, Nguyễn Ngọc Hương Khôi, your ideas please.
Hi teacher, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
So I would like to discuss between performance and competence. For example, when a learner can use a difficult grammar point, so we assess that he or she has a nice performance. However, this does not really reflect their real competence, because I think that, for example, like they have just learned that grammar point. However, the grammar point needs various practice, and through the practice, learner may make some mistakes, and then they will somehow internalize their input in order to have the correct output. So in short, I would like to say that the learner's performance do not wholly reflect their real competence of language learning.
Okay, so excellent ideas. Okay, so what do we? How can we call parole and long in Vietnamese? You know, Hương?
Dạ là performance, em nghĩ chắc là chắc là cái mà cái người học thể hiện ra, em cũng không biết dịch nữa. Còn competence là năng lực của người học.
Năng lực, còn cái kia là gì? Performance, nếu mình phải gọi cái term tiếng Việt thì gọi là gì?
Performance. Dạ.
Tất nhiên là dịch không được, nhưng mà các bạn hiểu rất là tốt. Còn cái term gốc mà Ferdinand de Saussure ông phân biệt á là long đương nhiên là language rồi, là ngôn ngữ, và cái pro là lời nói. Thì cái ông Ferdinand de Saussure này ông phân cực lưỡng phân, tất cả trong cái hệ thống ngôn ngữ ông đều phân cực hết, lưỡng phân hết. Thí dụ như là grammar với vocabulary, thí dụ vậy, hoặc là reading and speaking chẳng hạn, phân cực ra thì ông phân cực là ngôn ngữ và lời nói. Là ngôn ngữ là cái có sẵn bẩm sinh đó, và lời nói là cái người ta phát triển trong quá trình con người là một thực thể sinh học của xã hội. Như vậy các bạn giải thích cái performance với cái thằng competence rất là hay, rất là chính xác. Cái phần này chúng ta ghi nhớ nó như là những cái key term của cái language teaching. Chúng ta chia sẻ một chút xíu nữa thôi về cái clips, rồi các bạn sẽ short break một nội dung nhỏ nữa về cái clips. Okay, just a moment. Chomsky.
Not learned, but is capable of learning with appropriate stimuli. It is an important facet of social constructivism because it describes tasks that a child cannot yet do alone, but could do with the assistance of more competent peers or adults. Paul's Rebus, which started in the United Kingdom. Vygotsky's
from this one.
Zone of proximal development portrays the distance between learners' existing developmental state and their potential development. ZPD describes tasks that a learner has not yet learned, but is capable of learning with appropriate stimuli. It is an important facet of social constructivism because it describes tasks that a child cannot yet do alone, but could do with the assistance of more competent peers or adults.
Okay, so we have all heard about ZPT, and your friends presented quite well and substantially about ZPT. So just share your ideas, what you have note about ZPT, and what is your belief towards this kind of school of thoughts, ZPT. Okay, so your ideas, please come on. So anyone please? Minh Anh please, Trần Lê Minh Anh, your ideas please on ZPT.
Yes, hello teacher and everyone. So I think my idea about the ZPT is that student may not need the whole instruction. Teachers or parents can support them by giving them some instructive questions, and they will find out the rules themselves, kind of like the inductive teaching, right?
Okay, so very good keyword, inductive teaching. Okay, so very good word.
Yes.
Very good term too.
Yeah, so that is my understanding about the ZPD.
That is your belief, not the real understanding. But
yes.
I think you quite understand the belief well, and you quite understand the talk well, and your belief is very interesting. Okay, so any more of your ideas toward the ZPT, please?
Yeah, so personally, I believe that this ZPT has something to do with the innate ability to acquire the language of the children. So I believe that the children already possess that ability, but they still need appropriate stimuli to activate that knowledge, and so they will learn through the sayings and from the interactions of them and the adults who are already fluent in the language. However, I don't totally agree with this belief of the ZPT, since as I read, there is another problem called the logical problem, when the children can produce some expressions or phrases that they have never heard before, but they can still produce them. Yeah, they can be creative. They can create something that they haven't heard from anyone else. Yeah.
But there's a difference here, so we have to distinguish between the two terms, competence, language competence, and language performance. So ZPT is something to do with these two terms too. So in what way do you think is ZPT related to language performance and language competence? It is a whole package, not single separate items.
Yeah, well, I think this relates to the language performance, I believe.
Language performance.
Yes.
Language performance. So actually, ZPT forms in the two terms too. So because there may be an overlap section between language performance and language competence. So ZPT forms in the two too. Not actually, so interchangeably. I mean, so thank you. Any more ideas for the video clips? Any more ideas for your friends' presentations and for our last discussions for the first section of the class? I do believe that we may find one more item interesting in the video clip, that is the surface structure by Noam Chomsky. So have you ever heard about that, and have you ever how much have you understood about this term? Còn một cái term rất là hay nữa, nếu các bạn nghiên cứu trong cái clips vừa rồi có đề cập, nhưng mà trong cái presentation của nhóm bạn đó, thì không có đề cập đến, đó là cái surface structure, cấu trúc bề mặt, theo cái term được coined bởi ông Noam Chomsky. Các bạn hiểu gì, các bạn đã nghe gì về cái term này bao giờ chưa, và các bạn hiểu như thế nào về cái surface structure? Tất cả những cái này nó đều nằm trong cái gói chúng ta hết, nó không chạy đâu ra ngoài hết. Nó nằm trong cái language competence, nó nằm trong cái language performance, nó nằm trong, nó liên quan đến cái ZPT nữa. Nó có cái surface structure của Noam Chomsky, generated by Noam Chomsky. Any ideas, please? Do you need to watch this again? Chomsky. Let me. Somewhere, no, okay, here.
Chomsky was trying to show that human language cannot be scrutinized simply in terms of observable stimuli and 1960s reinforcement. Generative linguistics and cognitive psychology. In the decade of the 1960s, Chomsky's generative transformational linguistics emerged. Chomsky was trying to show that human language cannot be scrutinized simply in terms of observable stimuli and responses.
Quan điểm này của ông Chomsky là các bạn có hiểu không? Chomsky's Generative Transformational Linguistics là cái trường phái gì? Ngôn ngữ học ngữ pháp tạo sinh. Cái thời điểm này là cái trường phái của ông Chomsky này là ông dominate. Sau đó thì có rất nhiều các cái schools of thoughts, các cái trường phái sau họ tìm cách là họ phản bác những cái quan điểm này của Chomsky. Tất nhiên là phản bác ở từng cái khía cạnh nào đó, chứ không phải phản bác toàn bộ cái học thuyết của ổng. Thì cái học thuyết ngôn ngữ học, ngữ pháp tạo sinh của Noam Chomsky như tôi có nhắc lại đó, nó là một trong những cái trường phái rất là nổi tiếng. Thì ông này ông có một cái quan điểm rất là quan trọng mà trong cái claim này có đề cập, lẫn trong cái clips đó, nó có cái phần trình chiếu liên quan đến cái surface structure, tức là ngữ pháp bề mặt, ngữ pháp bên ngoài. Cái belief của ông là như thế nào? What is this belief here?
Observable stimuli and responses.
Your ideas are please. One more discussion before we have a short break.
I'm sorry, teacher. Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
So I'm not really sure about the surface structure, but there was a subject that I have learned at my university. Did talk about the surface structure and the deep structure in Chomsky opinion. Yeah, and I remember that I'm not really sure about it, but if my memory serves me right, something that we really have to think of is like the deep structure, something in our mind, because it is universal, and the surface structure is just something. I just remember about the fact about the deep structure, like for example, there was something that you have to deal with in the process of creating a sentence or creating an idea. So yeah, it is like a deep structure, and Chomsky means that I don't really sure, but I think that his idea about the surface structure is that dạ, ý em là kiểu cái surface structure thì nó không có quan trọng bằng cái deep structure thầy. Ở trong cái generative transformational linguistics thì kiểu ông này ông quan tâm đến cái deep structure, ví dụ như là cái cách mà cái quá trình mà trong đầu mình nó process ra một cái thứ gì đó. Ví dụ như là bây giờ mình nói là a red apple thì ở trong tiếng Việt mình nó sẽ là quả táo màu đỏ. Xong rồi nó sẽ có những cái bước để mà nó chuyển từ cái một quả táo trước, xong rồi sau đó thì nó chuyển sang cái màu đỏ, xong rồi nó ý là nó có những cái quá trình giống nhau trong cái việc mà nó chuyển thành một cái surface structure ở bên ngoài thôi.
Okay, so thank you very much for your ideas. And before the short break, let's watch a very short clips about this belief. Okay, come on. Okay, let me check. So it's we may have a problem here now, please. Okay, so we may have a problem watching this one. Okay, so because the theory is something different from what we have heard and understood or or remembered. Okay, so by anyway, so we will come back it later when we have times, and we are going to have a very close discussion on this. So we have a short break up 15 minutes. Okay, just come back to our class at 10 o'clock with another new link, please, because this call is going to end in 10 minutes. Okay, so short break, everyone, short break. And we are leaving this link Okay, just back, please. So before we move on to the second section of our class, as planned, just wrap up what we have discussed and done in the first part of the lesson. So just have a look at my slide for wrap up of the three perspectives reviewed. Three perspectives here representing for the three schools of thoughts in second language acquisitions. As we said, the first one is okay, so the first one is structural linguistics of behavioral psychology. The typical themes are descriptions, observable performance as presented by your friends. Empiricism, empirical and empiricism, chủ nghĩa thực tế, đúng không các bạn? Chủ nghĩa thực tế, empirical, thực tế, thực tế, empiricism, scientific method, conditioning, reinforcement. The two interesting things that were presented by your friends already. Conditioning, các cái hành vi có điều kiện, đúng không? Cái ví dụ của về con chó, ví dụ con mèo ha. Reinforcement như bạn đã nói, tức là nó phải có cái quá trình là repetition, lặp đi lặp lại. Thì khi mà các bạn chuyển sang các cái teaching methods and approaches, nó sẽ thấy những cái thoughts, những cái belief này nó được implemented ở trong đó. Thí dụ như audiolingual methods, phương pháp nghe nhìn chẳng hạn, thì nó áp dụng triệt để cái reinforcement này. The second school is generative linguistics and cognitive psychology. Tiêu biểu nhất ở trong cái trường phái này các bạn nghiên cứu về ông Noam Chomsky. Topical themes: language acquisitions, innateness, language competence, deep structure, interlanguage, systematicity and variability. Trong các cái term này có những cái vấn đề mà chúng ta đã thảo luận và đã trao đổi, thì như các bạn nói là language acquisitions nè, rồi cái language competence và language performance, là cái deep structure. Có hai cái term mà chúng ta đã thảo luận trao đổi và chắc chắn là chúng ta chốt. Thứ nhất là cái language competence và language performance. Như vậy có thể bạn thấy là language competence là ngữ năng, tức là cái khả năng sử dụng ngôn ngữ của một cái con người ta, và cái language competence này nó sẽ gắn liền với cái language acquisitions, gắn liền với quá trình lĩnh hội ngôn ngữ bản năng. Tức là mình sinh ra là mình đã lĩnh hội được cái sử dụng ngôn ngữ như thế. Thí dụ như các bạn nói một cái câu là con không có tiền, hoặc con có nhiều đồ chơi, nói những câu khẳng định, những câu phủ định như thế, mình không có học, mình cũng tự mình sản sinh ra được những cái câu như thế. Con có nhiều đồ chơi là câu khẳng định. Con không có tiền, con không có đồ dùng học tập khi con đi đến lớp, thì những cái câu khẳng định phủ định đó thì một cái đứa bé bình thường nó tự nó lĩnh hội và nó sử dụng được, nó không có cần phải học. Như chúng ta đã từng giải thích là các cái cấu trúc câu là chúng ta không cần học đó, ngữ pháp chúng ta không có học, từ vựng chúng ta không có học, thì cái dạng lập luận như vậy tương tự. Thì cái đây nó gọi là language competence, là ngữ năng, tức là khả năng của một con người sử dụng ngôn ngữ khi sinh ra đã có. Và nhắc lại là nó gắn liền với cái language acquisition, nó gắn liền với quá trình lĩnh hội ngôn ngữ. Còn cái language performance thì cái đây gọi là, nếu mà các bạn dịch á, thì mình có thể dịch từ là ngữ thi nha. Thi tức là implementation, tức là cái khả năng mà chúng ta sử dụng cái ngôn ngữ đó trên thực tế vào các cái hoàn cảnh, các cái yêu cầu về giao tiếp, thì nó gọi là ngữ thi, tức là language performance. Như vậy là cái language competence là cái có trước, gắn liền với cái language acquisition process. Còn cái language performance, cái ngữ thi là nó phải gắn liền với cái quá trình learning. Language learning nó mới sinh ra cái language performance. Chứ nếu không có learning thì nó sẽ không có cái performance. Cơ bản chúng ta có thể nắm và hiểu như thế, là hai cái process khác nhau dẫn đến hai cái results khác nhau. Thì một số học giả người Việt người ta có thể dịch là cái performance là ngữ thi. Còn đương nhiên mình dân tiếng Anh thì mình không cần dịch, nhưng mà các bạn phải nắm được cái bản chất của nó, đúng không? Cái này chắc trong quá trình học đại học thì chúng ta đã học rồi. Đó, thì chốt lại một cái discussion thứ nhất. Thứ hai, cái liên quan đến cái câu hỏi mà bạn Hương á, nói rất là hay. Hương đúng không ạ? Hương nói về cái deep structure và surface structure, cấu trúc sâu và cấu trúc bề mặt. Thì đại loại là cái phần này nó rất là khó về mặt ngôn ngữ học. Chúng ta chỉ nắm và hiểu như thế này. Cái ngôn ngữ, cái deep structure là cái quá trình nó tạo sinh ra ngữ nghĩa thông qua các cái language items, các cái language components, thì nó tạo ra cái quá trình tạo ra ngữ nghĩa, và nó qua nhiều cái giai đoạn biến đổi, thì nó gọi là transformational, generative, transformational là như thế. Đó, tức là biến đổi ngữ pháp hoặc là ngữ pháp tạo sinh chẳng hạn. Đó, thì nó trải qua những cái giai đoạn biến đổi ở tầng sâu. Đó, biến đổi nó mới đưa ra cái bề mặt là cái surface structure. Như vậy là cái thằng deep structure là cái quá trình tạo sinh rồi biến đổi, vừa generative vừa transformationally. Đó, thì nó sẽ có một cái quá trình rất nhiều các cái công việc, các cái bước nó xảy ra, thì nó mới dẫn đến cái thằng surface structure là cái mà chúng ta chỉ có nhìn thấy và chúng ta nghe thôi. Còn cái quá trình phía bên trong mà nó không có được hiển thị trên cái bề mặt. Đại loại là các bạn cứ hiểu như vậy thôi. Còn nếu mà ai nghiên cứu sâu thì tất nhiên chúng ta phải đi sâu vào. Như vậy có hai cái khái niệm cơ bản mà chúng ta cũng nắm cơ bản rồi. Deep structure với lại surface structure. Hương ơi, có giống như những gì bạn đã nói và đã học không? Hương ơi, Hương còn nói không? Hương mà nãy Hương nói hay là Ngân?
Yes, Hương is the one who presented that, but I think she's encountering some technical problem.
Okay, I'm here, teacher. I'm sorry because the Wi-Fi connection in my place is not really stable. So I have just received this now. I have just heard it now. Can you help me repeat the question, please?
Trước khi mình qua cái phần tiếp theo của lớp thì nãy giờ chúng ta đã chốt hai cái discussions chủ yếu là liên quan đến term. Thứ nhất là cái language competence và language performance. Bạn có nghe cái phần này không?
Dạ có.
Phần sau là cái deep structure và cái surface structure. Bạn miss đúng không?
Dạ. Dạ.
Đơn giản là cái deep structure là cái nằm sâu phía bên dưới cái quá trình xảy ra trước, và là nó bao gồm rất nhiều cái quá trình con với rất nhiều các cái hoạt động khác nhau, từ là generatively, từ là sản sinh ra cái ngữ nghĩa, rồi cái transformationally, cái quá trình biến đổi, nó gọi là generative và transformational là như vậy, là vừa sản sinh rồi phải biến đổi thay đổi, dài lâu, nhiều bước, nhiều công đoạn, nhiều cái items, thì nó mới dẫn đến cái surface structure là cái cấu trúc bề mặt, là cái cấu trúc cuối cùng, là kết quả của cái quá trình biến đổi đó. Thì cái thằng surface structure là cái chúng ta chỉ nhìn thấy và cái chúng ta nghe thấy, nhìn thấy và nghe thấy, cơ bản là thế. Còn chúng ta không thấy được cái quá trình nó xảy ra bên trong, bên dưới, bên sâu. Có giống như vậy, cái giải thích này có giống với những gì bạn đã được học và những gì bạn nói lúc nãy không Hường?
Dạ có thầy, dạ có.
Rồi, ok, so thank you.
Yeah.
Back to our slide, please. Rồi, the last school of thought, constructivism's interactive discourse, social cultural factors, construction of identity, GPT, cooperative learning and discovery learning. Thì đến cái giai đoạn về phía sau như các bạn nói đó, từ năm 1980 đến năm 2000, thì cái constructivism này nó đương nhiên là nó phát triển, nó sẽ nó sẽ chống lại những cái drawbacks hoặc là những cái disadvantages của hai cái school trước. Thì nó đương nhiên là sau này chúng ta phải phát triển các cái học thuyết mà nó phù hợp với cái yêu cầu điều kiện tình hình thực tế. Ngôn ngữ phải đưa vào sử dụng, ngôn ngữ phải thực tế được được giao tiếp hàng ngày, chứ không phải cái ngôn ngữ mà chúng ta chỉ sinh ra từ bản năng của một con người và mang tính đơn lẻ. Ngôn ngữ nó phải có tính xã hội, thì cho nên nó mới sinh ra những cái term mới với những cái principle mới, ví dụ như là social cultural factors, rồi construction, rồi GPT như chúng ta có đề cập đó, GPT và cooperative learning. Okay, so that's all for our first part of class. Let's move on to the second one. So for the second section of our class, we are just briefly and shortly generalize the most common and typical teaching methods or approaches. And if we have time, we just go over a little bit on the differentiations between the two terms, teaching methods and teaching approaches. Okay, so come on. So just take your job, please, now, everybody.
Oh, thank you. So it is our turn script to talk about the overview of methods. So let me share the screen to you. Okay, so I believe that all of us are teachers already, and we know a thing or two about the teaching methods. So that is why today our group is gonna briefly talk about the main points of the teaching methods and the approaches. And our 5 common methods are listed as above: classical method, grammar translation, audiolingual, direct, and communicative method. Okay, and we will go into them briefly. And first one, the classical method. And as the name implies, this is the oldest method. It places a heavy focus on grammar rules, vocabulary, and translation. And in the class, the dominant language is the student's native language to explain the new concepts, to interact, and sometimes to practice. And we will have a really strong focus on reading and writing skills, but with little time given to the oral use of language. So we don't focus on the communicative aspect at all. And all of this is based on the belief that we study the language to develop critical thinking and have a well-rounded education. So we study English or any language as a subject to become the master of it, and we ignore the fact that we need to use it too. And this method, the classical method, is very, very similar to grammar translation method. Some sources even imply that these two are the same thing. And the next up, Kim, she would talk to us about the grammar translation method. Okay, so Kim.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Thương. Now let me share the screen about grammar translation method. I'm sorry, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you, teacher. So as Thương has just presented the classical method, this term is sometimes used interchangeably with this one, grammar translation method, but they are not exactly the same because the classical method is broader and more focused on classical literature. On the other hand, GTM is more specific approach to language teaching that emphasizes the study of grammar rules and the translation of written text. So, to be more specific, let's talk about the characteristic of GTM. So, GTM it was widely used approach to language teaching in the past, and according to Bretter and Southard-Mercer, it was characterized by several key features. First, GTM classes were taught primarily in the mother tongue. So it means that it has little use of the target language or L2. And second, vocabulary was often taught through lists of isolated words. And third, grammar was given elaborate explanations with a focus on the complexity of the language. Fourth, we have difficult classical texts were introduced early and treated as exercises in grammatical analysis. And fifth, the occasional drills and exercises were given to translate sentences from L1 to L2. And the final characteristic is the pronunciation was given little or no attention. So as you can see that